Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia is as if the yellow wallpaper and Get Out had a fungus horror child. It's a story about a Gothic horror house that is pretty much rotten in every way. Psychologically, physically, morally. This house is intense. And the coolest thing about it is that underneath all the horror, the story is really about how powerful people consume everyone around them. I'm going to do a non-spoiler review first, and then we'll jump into spoilers, but I'll give you a heads up. So first I want to talk about the atmosphere of this book. The top words that show up for me when I think about the atmosphere is claustrophobia, disgust, and very vivid. The main character ends up in this dark, creepy house where like all the shades are drawn and there's mold everywhere and it's just decaying. And outside there's almost constant fog and mist in a cemetery right outside the property. Nobody in the family really talks. There are all these severe, cold people. And the main character, Noemi, can't do anything there, can't really go anywhere, and there's not even anybody to talk to. So you immediately feel that claustrophobia that she's in being there. And then the mold everywhere, and there's a bunch of other stuff that happens that I won't spoil that is completely disgusting, but it's there on purpose. It does something. It's worth the disgustingness. And there is the vividness. The writing is so well done. I could see everything. And usually I'm not good at picturing like the layouts of spaces and in people's facial features and that kind of thing. But in this story, I really felt like I immediately was in there and I could picture everything that the author describes. She's a really great writer for description. It's a little bit literary, but not literary in the way that it's overly poetic. It's just perfectly well done. So before the horror aspects of this novel even start, you're already getting this claustrophobic social situation that's adding to the heaviness and burden of this character's situation. It works really well. And let's talk about that main character. Noemi is a really interesting character because she feels so real. She's flawed, but she's also strong. And I think she's a greatly written female character. A lot of times female characters in stories come off too cliche and like caricature-like, where you want the strong female, so then you make them have too many masculine qualities. You make them more like male strong characters. Or you want them to be girly and then they don't do anything. They're just there to be saved. But Noemi has girly aspects about herself. You see right off the bat with her that she kind of likes to go to parties and dress up and look nice. And it seems like she dates a lot. But she kind of doesn't really care about the people that she dates. She's just really using them for, whatever she wants out of the date, more so than caring about them in any way. But she's also really smart. She wants to be an anthropologist, and she can manipulate people and read them really well. And she uses that technique of manipulation against her enemies. And she's also good at snapping back at characters, so that makes for a pretty fun character. But yeah, she just feels really real and human. She's not perfect, but I definitely found her likable. Oh, and she can also be selfish at times, and that's part of her arc. Next, we can look into themes. So there are a lot of themes going on. Some of them, I think, more obvious, and some of them a little bit less obvious. There's colonialism. That one's pretty much on the forefront. And there's issues of racism that are pretty clear right from the beginning. There's entitlement and characters who have these god complexes. There's issues about controlling women and women seeking freedom but being sort of trapped. And also there's a whole dichotomy between like shame and desire and like the outwardness of something seemingly being attractive, but really it disgusts you, and how those two things can coincide. So this book has a lot of interesting themes, and all the horror elements are entwined with these issues of power over people, which I think makes the story so much more interesting, and it has so much depth because of that. There's also another character in the story that the author does an excellent job with, and who is probably my favorite, even though I really loved Noemi. I'm not going to name them just in case it's a spoiler. I don't think it is, but I'd rather just be wary of that. But this character is basically the opposite of the power horror dynamic that is going on here. They're not somebody that is obsessed with greed and domination and ownership. They're somebody who is creative, like artistic and compassionate, and they work really well to help support the themes that are being presented in this story and help display the contrast and why the powerful are the ones that are so horrific and disgusting. I will say the story's not perfect. It's slow, but it's not always slow in a negative way. I think a lot of horror is slow because it begins slowly and you build up to an intense ending. This story is like that, but the middle does drag a bit. So it goes to the point of not just being a slowly structured on purpose and working, but getting to a point that it's dragging. Not horribly, but there is a part, there's a time where you start to be like, let's move it along, like we get it. We need to move forward now. So that is something to know. And one of the characters is sort of just doesn't have much character and is oddly doesn't get much of a place in the story when it feels like they should, and they feel like more of a device than a person. So that part's not that great, but pretty much every other character is really well done. So it doesn't hurt it too bad that there's one like device type character. But it really is worth reading if you want to get into these interesting themes, and if you like Gothic horror, and if you like literary horror, then I found it compelling the whole time and interesting, and it gave me a lot of different emotions throughout. So yeah, I think it was worth it. It's a story where the monster matters less than what the monster represents. Okay, now I'm going to get into the spoilery stuff. So if you haven't read the book and you don't want spoilers, then you should switch off the video, go read the book, and come back and watch this after you've read it. We can focus this section on the fungus, which I didn't want to mention too much in the previous section, even though I did note it at the beginning. But the fungus is metaphorical for so much of what's going on in this story, which makes it really interesting, and it's gross. So the fungus is one of the main symbols of colonialism in this story. It's something that invades people and grows. It erases individuality. It consumes everyone. And it turns people into extensions of just a single will. And this mirrors colonial power, especially things like ownership and racial superiority and exploitation of others. The book represents so much of that, and the characters do that, the family of the house does that, but the fungus is what's underlying them. It's the tool and part of the drive that also creates who they are and the horrible things that they will do to others for their own power, especially the father, Howard Doyle. So the fungus is an externalization of this colonial mindset. Next, let's return to that idea, that contrast I was talking about with attraction and disgust that takes place in this novel. So there's a lot of intermixing with what's happening with the characters, with like intimacy and sensuality, but then disgust and violation and that kind of thing. So that happens a bunch, with Naomi's feelings towards Virgil, and you can see it with other characters who have, anybody who has anything to do with Howard Doyle gets into weird situations where he is forcing himself on them in different ways, forcing people to do all different kinds of things beyond just physically. And I think that that's because the author is trying to explore these ideas about shame and controlling women through shame. And we see that so much with Noemi. Everyone in the book is constantly trying to shame her, not just the men, even Florence is shaming her. But everybody is also acting under this need for power that is all coming from Howard Doyle. So, well, and Virgil too, but yeah, so Florence's actions are still coming from that drive for power. And she shames Naomi as much as she can. The doctor shames Noemi. And Virgil shames her and tries to confuse her by using his attractiveness to pull her towards him, and then shame her also at the same time because of her attraction to him. So this is like a way to control her and to keep her in line, because she doesn't act out as much when she feels shameful. She wants to hide. She wants to step back and be more careful when she's more shameful. And it's not until she says, screw it, these people are all disgusting and I don't care, and entirely just is open to going against them, that she can shed that shame and not allow them to control her anymore, or at least maybe not allow them, but to really fight against their control fully. And there's also a ton of domination in this film by many of the characters, and part of that is done through attraction and seduction. So it reminds me a lot of the whole vampire shtick of like attractiveness being weaponized against somebody, and really deeply inside, that thing that appears attractive at first is horrific and disgusting in what they really are. Next, the character that I was avoiding talking about earlier is Francis, and I think the book really does something great with his contrast to his family. It makes me consider these ideas that I've been mulling over a lot lately, which are between capital and creativity, and what those two things bring to our lives in a contrasting way. So I think that the family represents power and wealth, and this need to constantly grow and gain capital, right? They're obsessed with that. Whereas Francis is different. Francis is the creative. He is compassionate. He's an artist. He doesn't seem to want power. He wants freedom. He never is trying to dominate anyone. He follows most of the time what people want from him. And although he is also flawed, he has weakness in that he doesn't stand up to his family, that he lets horrible things happen throughout his life. He also doesn't agree with it, and he eventually can overcome that, and he does it with his morality, with his ability to care, whereas the other characters are all selfish and self-obsessed and obsessed with power and wealth in the continuation of that. So it's a really interesting contrast, especially where he ends up being the one who is freed, who his morality and compassion allows him to escape. It's his ability to connect with others that leads to his freedom, whereas the family just feeds on death and then ends up succumbing to it. And the family is merely surviving in this rotting, gloomy, crumbling atmosphere. They have nothing. Whereas Francis is somebody who is warmer and ends up, through the connection to others, having the opportunity for a more fulfilling life. Moving on to those weaknesses, the character I was talking about was Catalina. So she doesn't talk the whole book, but it's kind of weird because she can talk sometimes, and it doesn't seem like Noemi pushes to see her much. And then there's a couple of times where she mentions having talked to Catalina, but we don't see it. And it's strange. And I know she's being like suppressed and dominated by the family, and her voice is completely stolen from her. And that is part of the point. So that's why, like, I think her character is fine, especially with all the other characters in the story that have a lot of depth. But it feels weird, especially at the end when they're escaping and Catalina is freed, but she still barely says a word. She's just like there with them while everything is happening to Francis and Noemi. So it's just a little strange, and it feels like she has no character, and we don't really get to see any connection between her and Noemi, which is pretty much what leads to Noemi's arc and her ability to drop some of her own selfishness and become somebody who's so much more caring and compassionate for the people around her. So Catalina ends up functioning more like a symbol and a device for Noemi and for the suppression of voice and self that the book is trying to represent, that people of power do to others, including women and the people who lived on the land that they're taking away or they're taking over. And in this case, it's the Mexican people, which kind of just takes away from her character. So yeah, I really liked this book. I did feel like it dragged in the middle, but I still think it's completely worth reading, and I would recommend it to people who like literary horror and these kinds of themes. I think it did a great job presenting them, and the feelings that it gave were so visceral, and the characters were likable, even with their flaws. It really gave off that, like, disgust for these elites that are just taking over everything and using everybody else to prop up themselves and their empty lives. If you made it this far and you liked the video, thank you so much. I would love it if you could like and subscribe, and I would love to hear your thoughts about the book if you read it. If you haven't read it, if you have any recommendations for horror that has like interesting and deep themes like this one, I would love those recommendations because this book was great. I really love horror, and I love it when there's that little bit of literary element to it that really gets into some in-depth ideas. So yeah, so let me know in the comments. See ya.